People once buried butter in bogs. Not by accident. On purpose. And somehow, that wasn't even the most complicated way humans tried to stop food from going bad. In deserts, they built enormous structures just to store ice. Across oceans, they shipped cargo that was literally disappearing the entire way. Melting. The cargo was melting. So how did humanity reach a point where a swamp counted as a kitchen cabinet? And why did some of these ancient tricks work so well that we still use them today? Before refrigerators, people basically had two options: outsmart the microbes or eat everything immediately. Let's start with the simplest refrigerator ever invented: the ground. Dig deep enough, and the temperature below the surface changes much more slowly than the temperature above it. Outside, the road is melting. The sun is brutal. Even the chickens look lightly roasted. But inside a cellar, it stays cool. Not modern fridge cooled, but cool enough to slow down the spoilage of vegetables, cheese, drinks, and other food. So people built cellars, basements, storage pits, and entire rooms underground. Some kept food near cold springs. Others used rooms where cool water constantly flowed past the containers. Technically, the refrigerator already existed. It just weighed several tons and was permanently attached to the house. The problem was, this only helped with food that could survive a little waiting. Meat, fish, and milk are not patient. First, the smell changes. Then, the color. Then the food starts looking like it might leave the plate under its own power. So people stopped changing where they stored food. They started changing the food itself. Microbes need water. So one of the oldest and most effective preservation methods was brutally simple. Take almost all the water away. People spread meat, fish, fruit, and herbs under the sun. They hung them near fires or left them in dry, moving air. The food became lighter, harder, and occasionally sturdy enough to repair a roof. But with very little moisture left, microbes had a much harder time growing. Dried food lasted longer than fresh food and weighed less, which made it perfect for travel. The downside was that sometimes you had to soak it before eating, then chew it, and keep chewing, until dinner quietly became breakfast. And technically, it worked. But drying depended on the weather. If the air was too humid, the food didn't dry, it just spoiled in a slightly more organized way. So humans moved to the next level. Make the food such a hostile place that microbes decide to live somewhere else. Salt pulls moisture out of food and makes life difficult for many microorganisms. So people packed meat and fish in salt or dropped them into strong brine. Sometimes the food was so salty that one bite could make a person drink a small lake. Another option was smoke. Smoking dried the surface and coated the food with compounds that slowed spoilage. It also made the food smell good. Assuming you enjoy the smell of a campfire that is permanently moved into your jacket. People also used vinegar, acidic brine, or the food's own fermented juices. Many dangerous microbes do not enjoy highly acidic conditions. But this is where things get stranger. Because sometimes people didn't try to get rid of microbes at all. They invited them in first. Fermentation is one of the smartest ways humans ever learned to preserve food. It is also one of the most suspicious looking. People allowed certain bacteria or yeasts to take over the food before anything worse could get there. Those microbes changed the acidity, the flavor, and the chemistry of the food, making it much harder for unwanted organisms to grow. That is how we got cheese, yogurt, fermented vegetables, bread, certain drinks, and a huge part of modern cooking. Humans didn't defeat the microbes. They hired one group of microbes to deal with the others. It's basically microbial security. One organized crew at the door, keeping the random troublemakers out. And then we put the result on a wooden board and call it artisanal. Now, forget all of that for a second. Up to this point, people were changing the food, drying it, salting it, smoking it, fermenting it,
Then someone asked a much bigger question. What if we leave the food alone and create cold instead, without electricity in the middle of the heat?
In hot, dry climates, people used porous clay containers. Sometimes they placed one pot inside another and filled the space between them with wet sand. Water slowly evaporated through the clay, carrying heat away with it, and the inside became cooler. Not freezer cold. Ice cream would have lasted about as long as your patience at a long checkout line. But vegetables and other foods could stay usable for much longer. This refrigerator had no motor, no light, no alarm screaming because someone left the door open. You just had to water it. It was basically a kitchen appliance pretending to be a houseplant. But that still wasn't the wildest solution, because in colder places, people didn't try to manufacture cold. They captured an entire winter and stored it for later.
During winter, people cut enormous blocks of ice from frozen rivers and lakes. Then they packed those blocks into deep storage buildings with thick walls. Straw, sawdust, and other insulating materials slowed the heat getting in. Done properly, some of that ice could survive spring and still be there in summer. Just picture the process. First, you wait for winter. Then you walk onto a frozen lake carrying a saw. You cut out pieces of January, drag them home, and lock them in a shed until July. Dryly, you have a refrigerator now. You just had to mine it first. Eventually, households began using ice boxes. A large block of ice sat in one compartment with the food stored nearby or below it. The ice slowly melted into a drip pan, which had to be emptied regularly. Forget to empty it, and your refrigerator became an indoor water feature. But wait, it gets stranger. All of this makes sense in a place where winter actually produces ice. But what do you do in a desert? Obviously, you build an ice fortress. In ancient Persia, people built structures known as yakhchals. They looked like enormous mud brick domes rising out of the desert. Beneath them were deep chambers protected by incredibly thick walls. The design used cool ground, cold night air, shade, and evaporation, all working together to keep temperatures low. These structures could preserve ice even while the air outside was brutally hot. So instead of buying a refrigerator, people built something the size of a small shopping center. And technically, it worked. The walls slowed heat transfer, the underground chamber stayed cooler, and the shape helped shield the ice from direct sunlight. But more seriously, this wasn't just a hole with frozen water in it. It was an engineered cooling system. No wires, no compressor, no repair technician saying the part will arrive in 2 weeks. But apparently, even an entire building wasn't ambitious enough, because eventually, ice became an international business. In the 19th century, natural ice was shipped across enormous distances. Workers cut it from frozen lakes, packed it into storage houses, loaded it onto ships, and sent it toward much warmer countries. Sawdust and other insulating materials were packed around the blocks, slowing the melting as much as possible. Now imagine running that business. A normal merchant can lose his cargo. Your cargo is actively vanishing every minute, right there in the ship's hold. A vessel could leave port carrying a mountain of ice and arrive with whatever had survived the journey. And somehow, the trade still made money. The ice cooled drinks, preserved food, and even chilled indoor spaces. Wealthy customers could buy a piece of real winter in places where many people had never even seen a frozen lake. Which brings us back to the question from the beginning. Why were people burying butter in bogs? Archaeologists in Ireland and Scotland have found large lumps of ancient butter, or animal fat, buried in peat bogs. Some had been there for centuries. Others, much longer. The fat was placed inside wooden containers, barrels, vessels, or wrapping, and then buried deep in the peat. A bog is cool. It contains very little oxygen, and it is acidic. Together, those conditions can slow decomposition dramatically. Maybe this was practical storage. Maybe people wanted to change the flavor. And some deposits may even have had a ritual purpose. But the basic fact remains. At one point in history, saying, "I put the butter in the swamp," may have sounded like responsible household management. Just imagine the conversation. Where's the butter? In the bog. Which part of the bog? Next to last year's butter. And technically, it worked.
Before electric refrigerators, there was no single magic solution. People attacked spoilage from every possible direction. They removed water, added salt, raised the acidity, used smoke, recruited helpful microbes, buried food underground, cooled clay pots through evaporation, stored winter ice until summer, built giant domes in the desert, and shipped frozen water across the ocean. The modern refrigerator took the central idea behind all of those methods and packed it into one metal box. Slow down everything trying to eat your food before you do. Now we keep groceries for weeks without thinking about the fact that a cold drink once required someone to cut ice from a lake, drag it across an ocean, or build an entire fortress. Although, after the bog butter story, that mystery container at the back of your fridge suddenly seems a lot less threatening.
Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe. There's plenty more good content coming.